Hey there. Thanks for tuning in. You ready for another episode of My Bigfoot Sighting? Alright then, let's do this.
Seen a bunch of rundown no-horse towns where the church is the backbone, love's in the plow, and the five-string melodies grooving, with the farmland rows where the roots run deep, beyond the noise of the busy streets, where the songs of the South are soothing. When I hear the front porch picking down, home rhythm ringing out, I don't run from banjo music. Yeah.
If you'd like to be able to listen to the show without ads and have full access to bonus content, that's an option. To find out how, please go to mybigfootsighting.com.
My Bigfoot sightings started in Southern California, and back then I didn't know what a Bigfoot was. I grew up in the Kern County area of California. It was 2008. I had just had my first child with my ex-wife, and we wanted to take a vacation before we moved to Washington, which is where she was originally from. Her family was up here. So we went out towards the Sierra Nevadas, outside Tehachapi, east of the area. And growing up, I didn't really do a lot of camping. My family wasn't big travelers, workaholics down in the valley. And so when I say we went camping, I mean we went to the Goodwill and bought pots and pans to cook over a fire that we didn't care about, kind of camping. Old school camping, I guess, would be the way to say it. Hot dogs, s'mores, things of that nature. So we ended up there in the Sierra Nevadas and had a good time. It was me, her, my best friend, and his girlfriend at the time. And we set up camp. We had a fire, having a good time. Got late. It was time to go to bed, sort of thing. And we were sleeping in separate tents. He had his, we had ours. The baby was being watched by grandma, so no baby was there, thank goodness. So the first night we were there, I remember being in my makeshift tent with her, and I always wake up at night to use the restroom. It's just something I've done since I was a kid. Middle of the night, restroom break. So I opened the tent, and I remember when I opened the tent, it was a clear night. It was beautiful. Stars. The moon was right above us. So you could see the shadows of the trees and very blue hue of color. Wasn't like I was going to fall. The fire was dead. Nothing but smoldering. No flames. Just this red pit in the ground. And I stepped out, and it was warm. This was late October, and we were just out in the middle of nowhere. Nobody was there but us. And I step out, stumbling around a little bit because it's dark. I just woke up, and I find an area to use the facilities. I'm standing there between me and my best friend's tent. And I'm relieving myself standing there, looking up at the sky, admiring the stars, the moon, and everything, admiring how it casts shadows on the ground. But then out of the corner of my eye, near my friend's tent, I catch a shadow. And I turn my head to the left, which was the direction of his tent. And I was probably 6 feet from there. And I see this shadow standing there. It looked like it was peering into his tent at first. And the first thought that went through my mind was, well, that's my friend. Maybe he got up to use the restroom or whatever. I look over, I see the shadow, and it's just kind of hunched over almost like you would trying to unzip your tent to get back into it. And so the first thought that goes through my head is, hey, what's up, bro? So that's what came out of my mouth. Hey, what's up, bro? As I'm relieving myself standing there. And I go back to focusing on what I'm doing at the moment. And then I notice I didn't get a reply. So I turn my head again and I look back over there in the shadows. This figure, which I call a figure at the time, was at least, I'm 5'11". I'm normal sized guy, 200 pounds. But this was maybe, as it's hunched over, would stand about 1.5 feet taller than me. But it's the silhouette of a head, shoulders, arms, and legs. And I look at it again, and I'm just confused at the moment because he didn't say anything back to me. And I'm staring at him wondering, bro, are you okay? And I said that, are you okay? And it didn't move. It just was frozen like a statue. But it was darker than the surrounding trees. It was darker than, I couldn't see through it. I couldn't, it was there, right there, but I couldn't make out what it was, but I could see it. It was not incredibly large, not incredibly tall. Like I said, maybe 1.5 feet taller than me, bent over. But then I noticed that I could see the reflection of the night sky in its eyes. And it was staring at me, frozen, like with its hand out. Frozen, not towards me, but towards my friend's tent, but it just didn't move. And I saw it blink twice. And at that moment, again, growing up in the valley, being a little tougher, I mumbled under my breath, "You better run," as I was finishing up myself using the restroom. And then without any hesitation whatsoever, I turned around. I walked back to my tent, which was only 4 feet from me, unzipped it, crawled inside, laid down, pulled my wife at the time close, and went to sleep. And at the time, I didn't understand why I did that. I didn't even the next morning. I didn't understand why I didn't yell. I didn't make more threats towards what was standing there. When I say my best friend, I mean, he's a brother to me. He's been through a lot with me, and he would have woken up, came out that tent, and we would have handled whatever that was. But it didn't compute in my head to do any of that. And so I just went back in my tent, and it didn't make sense. Even the next morning, I woke up, and the next morning, sun's out, clear day. I wake up and I go, did that really happen? And I remember the first thing I did was when I woke up, I got out of the tent, and my best friend was up with his girlfriend making coffee. They were like, "Hey, how you doing?" I was like, "Good." But I looked over between our tents and I could see the wet spot where I had relieved myself the night before. So I knew it happened right there. That was hard proof for me. And I looked over and I thought, well, do I tell him? Do I tell him what I saw? Do I scare them whatsoever? I don't know what I saw. At that time, it was either an alien or a demon, because I didn't really think Bigfoot at the time, because Bigfoot wouldn't do that kind of, I don't know. I just didn't know enough at the time, I guess. Youth is foolishness sometimes, I guess. So I thought about it a little bit. I told him the next day, and he's like, "Why didn't you wake me up?" I was like, "Dude, I don't know. I thought it was you, but then it wasn't you." I could see that it was just dark. I could tell it was big. I didn't know what to do, but at the same time, I'm not a coward, but I just went right back in my tent, went to sleep like nothing happened. And it wasn't until years later, I had another friend once I moved to Washington, which shortly after this experience, who told me about infrasound. And he told me that what I saw was a Bigfoot. I was in such close proximity to it that that could have been what its defense mechanism was. And somehow it just made me dumb, just foolish. I wasn't scared, but I wasn't coherent. And that was my first Bigfoot encounter that I now call my Bigfoot encounter, that first one, due to the fact that it was years later they told me, dude, you got infrasounded. And it just told you to go back to bed or whatever. It subliminally, I guess is the proper term. But nothing had happened. No damage done. This was also Southern California. There were pine needles everywhere. We were looking for something like footprints. Even if it wasn't Bigfoot, we were looking for evidence of somebody being in our camp. And there was none because it was late fall and there was just no mud. There was nothing. This is the Sierra Nevadas. That whole area is probably burnt to the ground now. But yeah, that was my first encounter that I didn't know was an encounter with a Bigfoot. And I will 100% believe that it was to this day after years of not knowing and then someone telling me in Washington what that was from their own experiences. So that was my first one. So I moved to Washington State in 2008 in November. Like I said, the first encounter was late October. It was kind of like a last hoorah before I moved to be closer for my wife and her brand new baby. So I moved up here and I fell in love with the Pacific Northwest. Like I said, I grew up in the valley. I was used to dirt, browns, no trees. The only trees we had were in parking lots surrounded by cement. And they were just twigs coming out of the ground. So coming to the Pacific Northwest was awe-inspiring. I compared it to being in Jurassic Park. The greens, the berry bushes, everything's just phenomenal here. And I love it still to this day after all these years. I decided I was going to do more outdoor stuff. I started kayaking, hiking, went hiking up Mount Rainier, things of that nature, stuff like that. And then I really enjoyed logging roads. They were fun. Back then I had a Subaru Outback and I felt like I was driving a tank. I was impervious and I would go up by myself at this time to just explore and go on my own hikes. I had recently back then purchased a rifle and I wanted to do some shooting with it. So I grabbed it up, threw it in the Subaru, and I went out on my own. Man, this one's still, I'm pretty sure my voice is shaking now, even talking about it. So I went up one time outside of the National Forest of Mount Rainier. I took a logging road that I had no idea where it ended. I still don't know if I know where it ends. But it wasn't busy. There was no logging happening, no 18-wheelers, nothing of the nature. And it was just me and acres and acres and acres of nothingness. So I thought. Again, this was before I knew what I experienced in California. So I went up and I parked at a T. So I grabbed my rifle. I was excited to blast off some rounds, see how it worked, have some fun with it by myself. I started walking. I had a backpack, water, food, all the necessities. Started walking down this trail. It's not a trail, it's a road, but it was an unused road, if that makes sense. So it was a road that now is a trail, but you can't drive down it. So I'm going down this thing into a valley. So I was surrounded by hills. I'm just having a good day. It's a sunny day, middle of the day. And I hiked probably about 1.5 miles. And I got my backpack and I got my rifle slung over my shoulder, having a good time. Just me. No music, no nothing, just listening to nothingness, which is awesome. But when that nothingness gets disturbed by something that you can't explain, that's terrifying. And I was about 1.5 miles in, I'm assuming. And back then I was very athletic. Not so much anymore. I would never put myself in this situation again for this reason. By then, I had been in the woods enough to know the sounds of cougars, mountain lions, bears. We only have black bears up here, but they have their own distinct roar if they're doing something strange. But this came from the trees around me, and you could hear it bounce off of every single tree and reverberate back. I, at that moment, had realized I had gone too far. I had pushed myself too far. Where I had been at that moment was just too far. I couldn't explain the sound. I can't even imitate it for you. But when you hear it, you know. It's maybe something primal. It's maybe something genetically in our DNA, in our blood, to know that this is something bad. And it just echoed through the trees, just bouncing off them like it was surrounding. It sounded like it was all around at the moment. And I pulled for my rifle. I pulled it off my shoulder and I put it in my hands, and it just got worse. The sounds were terrifying, coming from everywhere, all around me, from behind, from above, from below. It might as well have stood right in front of me and screamed in my face. And out of the corner of my eye, yet again, I have pretty good peripheral vision. I saw something above me in the trees. And so I looked up out of fear, out of wanting to know where this was coming from. And I saw it hanging from the trees, or hanging from not the trees, not like Jungle Book or like anything like that. It was holding on to the tree, looking down, probably about 200 feet away. And it was even more mad now that I had my rifle in my hands versus it being on my shoulder. I could tell. It slapped the tree 3 or 4 times, and then it jumped from that tree to the next tree. That was probably 6 feet from where it was, but it did it so flawlessly. It reached for it and it jumped. This was huge. I can't give you a proper estimate on how tall it was because of how high it was in the tree and how far it was from me at the time. But I would I just say an ape. It was an ape. It was a Bigfoot. But it didn't have those like shorter legs like apes had. It had long legs. I could picture it still in my mind between trees. It didn't fly towards it like it wasn't. How do I explain this? It knew where it was going to land in that next tree. And at that point, I said, I'm done. I'm done. I'm not going to shoot out of sheer fear because this rifle I'm holding is not going to do anything to what is in that tree. So I turned around, I ran. And I ran that 1.5 miles, probably felt like forever. Because I could hear it breaking branches. I could hear it coming from tree to tree to tree to tree to tree. I was like, bears don't do that. Bears don't jump from tree to tree. There's no way that's... It's not a black bear. It's too big to be a black bear. Black bears aren't that big. And I ran that probably 1.5 miles, probably faster than it felt. And I got back in my car. I threw my backpack off my shoulder. I had an auto start in the car, so as soon as I saw its headlights, I was pushing the button frantically for it to start before I even got there. I was sweating. I couldn't breathe. I threw everything in the passenger seat, and I left, peeled out of there, gravel, everything flying. And I could still hear it howling almost not a howl, but like a, yeah, don't come back, if that makes sense of a sound, as I left. And I have never returned to that spot, ever. But it didn't deter me from still going back into the woods. And that was my second encounter. My third encounter was years later. I say years like I'm old. I'm not that old. So maybe a year or two later, I do a family camping trip with my children every year. It's something that we've always done. It's something that it's family tradition every summer here in Washington. That year was a good year, but their grandmother wasn't able to stay, my mother. So she had to leave. So it was me, their grandfather, my stepfather, and my three kids. And they were young still. I believe the youngest was still in diapers, just having a good time, though. Having s'mores, fire, simple, beautiful Washingtonian afternoon. No rain, no nothing. I was getting into hammock camping at this time. So I strung up my hammock, and I spent a lot of... Anyone who knows hammock camping, it's not cheap. It's quite expensive. So it came with the hammock, the sleeping system, and a rain fly, which is basically like a pup tent that hangs over your hammock, but you can see underneath it all around you. It's just to keep the rain off you if it does rain, or keep the sun off you if it's sunny. So we also had a giant tent that my father had brought for him and the kids to sleep in that night. So it was getting late. Kids are getting restless. Me and the old man, we stayed up a little bit longer around the fire, just talking. They were in the tent, passed out at this point. It was pretty late. I'm assuming before midnight, but maybe somewhere around there. Again, nice clear night. Moon's out, lighting up the woods around us. Good time. So we finally... I tell the old man, I was like, hey, I'm getting tired. I want to go to bed. And he's like, all right. So I crawl into my hammock and he goes into the tent. So I'm probably 12 feet from them, but I'm between two trees and I'm right next to a wildlife trail, or a game trail, as it were. You can tell that deers or stuff have come through this area, just doing their own thing. We're next to a water source, a natural water source. So this is deep woods camping, logging roads again. So I was up there, get cozy, get settled in my hammock, and I'm swaying back and forth, which is one of the greatest comforts to me still this day. It's just hanging out in nature, just exposed. It's nice. Even with everything I've seen so far, I find it very comforting. So I'm hanging out, literally hanging out in my hammock. I don't have my phone with me or anything. I have a little headlamp on my hat because I always keep a headlamp on because I know I'm going to have to wake up and use the restroom in the middle of the night. And where we were, this isn't solid dirt. How do I describe it? Pine needles, just foliage from trees. Pine needles, pine cones, over and over again, thousands of times, kind of creates what sounds like a hollow drum on the earth. So you can hear your own footsteps when you walk on it, especially if you jump. It kind of reverberates in a way. And so I'm in my hammock and I'm sitting there. I got my eyes shut. I'm ready to go to sleep. And I hear footsteps on this hollow earth, this thump, 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 like just very bassy. footsteps, but not fast, not like I just did, but thump, 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 thump. And I heard it come from towards where the tent was. So I figured it was my old man coming out to use the restroom before he went to sleep. Maybe he got in bed. He was like, oh, I got to use the restroom before I fall asleep. So what I do is I hear it come like right next to me. And when I say right next to me, I mean less than 2 feet from me on my left. And so I hit my headlamp. I wasn't asleep yet. And I was like, you all right, old man? No reply. But it stopped. It stopped right next to the rain fly, the hammock. And so I leaned forward in my hammock with my headlamp on, and I turned to look down. I can't see out. I can't see horizontally from where I'm laying because the way the rain fly comes down, it kind of makes a teepee in a way. And so I point my head down to look towards the dirt to see if I could see his sneakers or something. It wasn't his sneakers. These were the largest, hairiest, unholy feet I've ever seen standing right next to my hammock in the middle of the night. My first reaction was not to think it was anything but what I had learned about up here in Washington. That was a Bigfoot standing right there. And these, if I go back to my California story and describe how slim that one was, this was the complete opposite. It was so detailed from the black diamond light shining on my forehead that I could see toenails, but massive. They looked like clamshells on top of a hairy foot. Maybe not even clamshells, even bigger than that. Maybe oyster shells. These things were huge. I just froze in fear. I knew exactly at that moment what that was. I always sleep with a pistol with me. So I immediately slid my hand down, grabbed my pistol, turned my headlamp off, laid straight back down in my hammock, and held that pistol to my chest and held my breath. I went, oh, Lord, this is it. He's going to just drop kick me or pick me up in this hammock, or something bad is about to happen to me. All over again. I've had some good experiences with these creatures, but this was not one of them. He was right there. But he didn't move. He just stood there. And as I'm swaying in the darkness with a pistol on my chest, finger on the trigger, just hoping that it's not like he couldn't see me, but that he wouldn't be intrigued. All he would have to do is bend down, pick up that rain fly, and look down at me in a little tortilla. And I just was like, go away, 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 go away. And after about 20 seconds, I could hear that thump again, that next step. And it walked away. It went down that game trail and faded into the trees. I could hear twigs snapping because the game trails are usually grown up over. They're usually not easy to walk through. But at that moment, he was gone. And once he was gone, I could tell he was far enough away. I jumped up out of my hammock, pistol in hand, ran to the tent, unzipped the tent, turned my light on, shined it down in the tent, and there was my dad and my 3 kids sleeping soundly, peacefully. The rest of the night, I kept throwing wood on the fire. I didn't sleep the entire night. I was up all night just waiting if he was going to come back up that game trail, but I kept looking towards it, but it was just, he wasn't coming back. I don't know. I think he was just passing through. I think he just was like, this is my normal way home, or wherever he was going. I don't know. But he had just happened to walk right through our camp. And I just so happened to be the foolish one, not in a tent. And I got a really good look at those feet. And I'll tell you right now, those feet are everything you can possibly imagine they are. Very big. Very, very, very big. That's exactly where he gets his name from. And very unclean for that nature. Next day, everything was fine. He left no trace. He left nothing. I walked down that game trail the next day. I could see broken branches, things of that, but they were very high up, 10 to 11, 12 feet high. I could see where maybe he was walking, a twig hit him or whatever. He just smacks it down. You could see where it ripped and tore. That was a bad one, but ended very good. I didn't feel like he was going to hurt me. He just frightened me beyond belief. It was very terrifying that night as well. So that was my third actual physically seeing this thing. So this encounter happened recently. So this was 2020. My brother came from Arizona to visit, and he wanted to go Bigfoot hunting because he had heard legends from Arizona. We grew up separate, but he was like, man, you're in Washington, I want to come up and let's go find a Bigfoot. He thought it was funny. And I'm like, man, they're real. I keep telling you. They're very real. It's not something you want to play with, but maybe we can get like a decent encounter out of it. Maybe, who knows? So we left my house and I took him to the same mountains where I've had most of my experiences. It's a very select group of mountains. I don't want to give it away because I enjoy going up there and I don't want any more people up there than there already is piling in every weekend. So we left late because he's a city boy and wanted to take a shower and get some Taco Bell on the way out of town kind of thing. And like, all right, let's, hurry along now. We got a hike ahead of us because we were going to go stay at a lake that is like an alpine lake. It's top of the mountain lake, basically as high as you can go. There's these lakes up there. So we left. This is during the solstice too, so it was dark at like 4:30. So we drive up the road, and it gets darker as you're driving in the forests way quicker than it does if you're in the cities. The trees have a way of just absorbing darkness that I find beautiful, but terrifying at the same time. We get up there. We're having a good talk on the way up, and he's getting himself hyped up. Like he's going to see something. He just knows it. And I'm like, it can or it can't happen. You don't get to pick when you see these things. They get to pick when they see you. And so we parked at the trailhead, and it was I've hiked this trail multiple times. Daylight, usually. But tonight we were doing it in the dark. So we park. He brought his own backpack. He said he had his own gear, and I had mine, which I didn't question what he had brought at the time. But I gave him one of my rifles, and I had a pistol on my hip because it's not so much the Bigfoots we're looking to shoot or even have an encounter, but at the same time, in the Pacific Northwest, in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of the night, you probably want to have a firearm with you. And so we start hiking. This hike is a very narrow hike. Again, equivalent to what would be a game trail. Very, very narrow on your way up. And at the top, like I said, there's this lake, but on your way up, you pass waterfalls from the lake overflowing, and it has created these beautiful waterfalls that you get to crisscross, switch back all the way to the lake. Doing it in the dark is a whole other monster than it was doing it in the day. I was fighting a cold at the time, and it was taking its toll on me as I'm hiking. I only had basically tonight to do it with him. He was leaving the next day. So I was trying to suck it up, and we're going to get to the top of this thing no matter what. We're going to spend the night. It's going to be awesome. We got to a switchback, and we're taking a break, water break, more for me to catch my breath. And he's digging through his bag as we're sitting there. And I'm like, what are you doing? Getting water? What? You need water? I got water right here. Did not check these out. I bought them for the trip. They were legitimate, like, I don't know how much he told me he spent like a couple $1,000 on them, but they were night vision goggles. And I was like, oh, that's cool. Nice. Let's play with them since we're sitting here taking a breather. And he turned it on, and you don't see any light from a night vision goggle. I guess the way they work is they send out basically like a super invisible laser that lightens up everything around it, and you can sit in the dark but see as if it was daylight. And so he's scanning the hills around us. This is a very vertical hike. He's looking around. He's like, try them out. I'm looking. I'm like, that's pretty cool. That's pretty cool. I didn't see anything. I was just like, that's very cool. Don't know what you're going to do with those in the desert, but cool. You should leave them here with me, being the younger brother. And he puts them away. We start hiking some more up the switchback. And we get to the second crossing, which is over the waterfall, as I described earlier. And there's boulders on the side of it, big boulders. And just kind of started getting this uneasy feeling. But I didn't feel like we were in danger, just uneasy. And I'm like, oh, it's because we got to walk across this very slippery rock in the dark to get to the other side to finish our trail, to finish our hike. So I'm like, you go first and I'll follow behind you. And we both have headlamps at this time. We're using flashlights, obviously. He went first, and it's probably about a couple yards, maybe 10, 15 yards across this running water that's rushing over this piece of like slant granite. And so I wait till he's about halfway over, and I'm like, okay, my turn. And I'm carrying a backpack, hiking backpack, 85-liter, big thing, full of food, full of tents, things like that. And I take a couple steps out on the rock, and I'm being very precise, very strategic, using my headlamp to see where to step on this rock without slipping and sliding down all the way back to where the car was parked. He got to the far side, and I could see him turn around, and his headlight shone back over towards me to help me see what I was doing. And just as he had done that, that roar came back. It was right behind me, but not on the waterfall, not on the rock, but from that where we started, right there. This unholy, absolute maddening roar that just echoed. And since this was the second time I had heard this roar, I dropped to my knees in this rushing water with my hands down, with this backpack on, and I shut my eyes and I bowed my head and I said, okay, don't move. He, on the other hand, decided to pull his rifle and run back across this giant waterfall rock to where I am knelt down, and he was standing above me in a matter of seconds. And he is breathing, he is panicking, he is shaking. I could actually hear the rattle from the shoulder sling rattling against the rifle. And he is looking over the top of me. He's like, what is that? What is that? What is that? What is that? And I still in the knelt position, basically accepting our fate, told him it was an owl. And he left. And he's not laughing jokingly or anything, but laughing out of fear, just chuckling like that's not an owl. I said, no, it's an owl. Let's go. Come on. Keep going. Keep going. Turn around and let's get across this river, or this, not river, but this waterfall. he's like, get up. And he's like helping me up, reaching down, still with the gun pointed towards where this noise had come from, reaching down with his other hand, picking me up. And we both turn around and look back towards these boulders. And we both saw it. It stood about 9 feet tall, maybe 10, shrouded hood. It looked like someone wearing a hoodie, but built like a tank. I can only imagine the shoulders were 5.5, I don't know, 5.5 feet across. Just this monster standing there. Its face was very vivid, and it was snarling. It was mad. And it just gave us this look like we were lucky that we were where we were, because it wasn't going to come out there to keep chasing us. Which, of course, we're both pale white now. We're both shaking. And we were like, run. So we ran across the rest of that waterfall. And we just kept going up this trail. And as I said in the beginning of the story, I have done this trail multiple times with family, friends, groups. I knew where we were going. But for some reason, we just kept going. And we kept going, and we kept going, and we kept going. And I looked at my watch. I have an actual wristwatch on my wrists. And I'm like, it's 3 a.m. And at the same time, I have an insulin pump in my pocket. I'm type 1 diabetic, and it has its own digital clock in there. And I looked at that, and it said it was 11:59. And I'm showing my brother this, and I'm like, we've gone way too high up this mountain. And it wasn't until we were in the actual cloud level of this mountain that we realized we had gone too high. And the next thing I did was, we got to go back. We missed a turn. I don't know how we missed a turn. I don't know where we are. But we were so terrified in the moment of what we had just seen, we just kept going. And we had spent so much time going that I didn't know what time it was, because I'm getting 2 different times from 2 different devices on me. I can't explain the timepiece thing. I can't to this day. But we went back down. And as we're going down, he's leading, because now he's mad. He's ex-military. He's like, I'm going to go down this hill. I'm going home today. That was his mentality. Me, I'm struggling with a cold. I'm trying to get down with him. I'm probably a couple yards behind him on the way down this trail. And then eventually I hear him yell through the bushes and the switchbacks, "What is this? What is this?" And I start sprinting. I'm like, all right, I'm coming. And we eventually had found where we had missed the turn, and we were at the lake where we wanted to be in the middle of the night. I don't know why we got lost, except for the fact that, people be like, oh, it was dark. Well, fear and adrenaline will do a lot to you. And you will make decisions in the dark, especially when you see something that you can't explain. You're going to make mistakes. You're going to go up or down, left or right. You're just going to get as far away from that as you can. And I think that's a lot of where these people go missing, and they don't understand where they go missing. We spent the night up there. We built the biggest fire you could possibly imagine, because we were just terrified that thing was still out there. We didn't hear anything the rest of the night. But that morning, I remember waking up in my sleeping bag, and I wasn't eyes wide awake, but it sounded like children or younger people, or I don't know, people talking in the trees around our camp. And I just shut my eyes. I was like, it's hikers. It's early hikers. Washington is known for that. There are early hikers coming up here having a good time. My brother heard it as well. And about 30 minutes later, I get out of my bag. I wake up enough to move. He's making coffee. He's like, "Do you hear that snort?" I was like, "Yeah, it sounded like a family or something, a bunch of kids, something like that, you know?" And he's like, "Yeah, that's what I heard too, but I didn't see nobody." I was like, "That's strange." And then shortly after that, we packed up after breakfast, went back down, did our crossings, got back to the car, and at the trailhead, there was no car. Not a single car. And then we looked at each other, and we knew what we were thinking at the same time. It was, well, what was that up on the hill that we just came down? It sounded like a family, sounded like talking, but we couldn't distinct words. It was just more like, it's like, what did they say? Well, I don't know what they said. I wasn't putting sentences together. But we both had heard it, and we got in the truck, we drive down the mountain, and it's a long drive. It's probably about 30-minute drive off the mountain from the trailhead. And there wasn't a single car the whole way down. And we didn't see a single car until we hit the small town that's at the base of the mountain. And we were like, that doesn't make any sense. From what I'm assuming, it was a group of them that night on that mountain. I assume that playing around with the night vision goggles and sending out that beam of light, they saw that. We couldn't see it, but they did. We probably lit up that whole side of that mountain to them, and they wanted to see what that was. And the big boy who was hiding behind the boulders, who stood up and let us get a good look at him, he was the one who was in charge of that group. And he was not pleased with us whatsoever. The fear, I don't know if he sent out infrasound, I don't know what he did, but the fear that was instilled in us, besides the fact of seeing something that just shouldn't be there, sent us up that mountain like we were just scared children. So high that we were actually in the clouds, in the fog of the sky. This cold, damp fog. We were in the clouds, and we realized that, and that's what made us turn around and come back down. I hear these stories of missing people in the woods. I hear these stories of, you know, the guy who's been writing the missing 411 books, stuff like that. Very real. And I don't think that you're just getting taken either. I think you run for your life because you're so terrified, and no one finds you. And we were lucky to keep a cool head. Again, I don't understand the time changes on my devices. I don't understand any of that whatsoever. That is very weird. And I had to reset my watch when I got off the mountain. But I still go out there all the time. I still explore the woods all the time. I actually live in a fifth wheel full time because I love it so much. I love being around nature. I've seen deer. I've had experiences with mountain lions, trying to take my son during a family camping trip because we camped in a rock quarry. And all you got to do is just shoot a shotgun off and they'll run. But these things, they don't run. They want you to run. They want you to be afraid. They want you as far away from where they are as possible. And if you just so happen to be there, they can scare you just by existing. They're very real, very loud. And I warn my son constantly because he loves it so much as well. That's why he tells me, you know, Dad, you got to listen to these podcasts, or Dad, you got to tell your stories, or whatever. He knows it's real, but he doesn't know the severity of it because I never wanted to tell him the 100% true stories of what I have seen because I didn't want him to be afraid of it. But I know one day, if he keeps down this path, he's going to go out into those woods and he is going to come face to face with it, just like his old man has so many times. And he's going to be calling me going, Dad. And I'll be like, you did the right thing because you're giving me a call. You're not missing. You did a good job, son. Just be careful.
Well, that's it for tonight's show. If you've had a Bigfoot sighting and would like to be a guest, please go to mybigfootsighting.com and let us know. Thanks for listening. Have a great night.
Seen a bunch of rundown no-horse towns where the church is the backbone, loves in the plow, and the five-string melodies grooving, with the farmland rows where the roots run deep, beyond the noise of the busy streets, where the songs of the South are soothing. When I hear the front porch picking down, home rhythm ringing out, I don't run from banjo music. Yeah.